The downtown restaurant hummed with the familiar chorus of voices and clattering silverware, a chaos that made Jack Foster feel oddly at ease. Families leaned over tables, couples toasted with wine glasses, and waiters weaved between them, balancing trays stacked high with sizzling plates. The Riverview Grill wasn't fancy, not the kind that charged extra for candlelight or background violinists, but it had something Jack valued more, the kind of noise that made him and his daughter feel less conspicuous. Two people folded into the comfortable anonymity of the crowd. At his corner table, Jack sat with Sophie, his 10-year-old daughter, whose plate of macaroni and cheese was already half finished. Her feet swung a little above the floor, her sneakers never quite reaching the ground, and she tapped them in time with the jukebox music faintly audible above the chatter. Jack watched her with the quiet, steady focus of a man who found peace not in extravagance, but in the small expressions of his child's happiness. "Dad, look," Sophie whispered, holding up a spoon with a piece of macaroni perched precariously on top. She balanced it like a tightrope walker before tilting the spoon just enough for the pasta to tumble back onto her plate. She giggled at her own game, proud of such a small victory. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "That's some impressive balance. Maybe I should sign you up for the circus." She laughed louder, leaning over the table as though sharing a secret. "Only if you're the clown dad. You'd have to wear the big shoes." The joke landed exactly the way Jack hoped it would. Not because he loved being the punchline, but because her laughter filled the air like the only music he ever needed. He took another bite of his meal, nothing more than a burger and fries, but each bite tasted better for the company across from him. For Jack, evenings like this weren't routine. They were reminders. Ever since he had taken on the role of raising Sophie on his own, he understood the fragile weight of every moment. She was growing quickly, slipping through the years like water through his fingers, and each dinner, each laugh, each inside joke became a memory worth holding on to. Sophie leaned her chin on her hand, watching him with a curious gaze that always seemed older than her age. "You look tired," she said softly, a note of concern threading her voice. Jack smiled, brushing the comment aside with a warmth that masked the truth. "That's because you wore me out at the park earlier. You run faster every week." "Not faster than you," she replied, quick and sure, her eyes shining with the absolute belief that her father was unstoppable. He didn't correct her. He didn't tell her that his knees ached more now than they used to, or that the long days at the construction site took their toll in ways he never spoke of. To her, he wanted to be exactly what she saw. The man who could always keep up. The man who never fell behind. Around them, the restaurant carried on. Waiters shouting orders, the clink of glasses from the bar, a burst of laughter from a nearby table of coworkers celebrating something trivial. To most people, Jack was just another tired father trying to keep up with the simple ritual of dinner out. And that was how he preferred it. He had lived other lives in other uniforms, carrying other responsibilities. But here at this table, he was simply Sophie's dad. He reached across the table, brushing an invisible crumb from her cheek. "Eat a little more, sweetheart. Then maybe we'll split a dessert." Her face lit up instantly. "Ice cream, ice cream." He confirmed, though he knew the sugar rush would keep her awake longer than he'd like. Some rules were meant to bend on ordinary evenings like this. Neither of them noticed not yet how quickly ordinary was about to vanish. Sophie was in the middle of describing how her school's art teacher always made the paint water look like rainbow soup when her voice trailed off. Her gaze shifted toward the bar across the restaurant, her fork pausing midair. Jack noticed the change immediately. The way her brows knit together, the way her body leaned slightly away from what she saw. "Dad," she tugged gently at his sleeve, her tone quiet, uneasy. "That lady looks scared." Jack followed her line of sight. Near the bar, a young woman, maybe mid-20s, her hair pulled back neatly in a professional style, stood with her back pressed toward the wall. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of corner offices and client meetings, but her composed appearance was fracturing around the edges. Two men flanked her, leaning too close, their voices carrying just enough for nearby tables to hear. They laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that invited joy. It was sharp mocking, the kind that made the listener shrink rather than smile. The woman shook her head, clearly saying no, but the men acted as though the word had no weight. One reached casually toward her arm, the gesture too familiar for strangers. She tried to sidestep, but he blocked her way with the deliberate ease of someone who thought no one would stop him. Jack's eyes flicked quickly around the room. People had noticed. He could see it in the quick glances, in the way diners lowered their heads and pretended to study their menus more intently. A couple at the booth nearest the bar whispered behind their hands. One man pulled out his phone but used it only as a shield, scrolling blankly rather than dialing for help. The restaurant staff exchanged nervous looks but didn't move. Silence in that moment was louder than any sound. Sophie shifted in her chair, her small hands curling into fists against the table. "Why isn't anyone helping her?" she whispered. Jack felt the question land heavier than it should have. He had seen this kind of scene before, not in restaurants, but in other places, in other countries, where hesitation carried consequences too great to ignore. Here, though, the stakes felt no less real. A crowded room full of capable people all choosing to look away. His daughter's eyes were fixed on him now, wide and searching. She had already drawn her conclusion. If no one else would act, her father would. Jack exhaled slowly, the air steadying him, even as the muscles along his jaw tightened. For a moment, he remained perfectly still, his burger half-eaten, his napkin resting neatly on his lap. But inside, a voice he hadn't heard in years was waking up. The voice that had guided him through sandstorms and firefights, through missions where failure meant more than a bad performance review. It reminded him now of what he once was, what he still could be when needed. At the bar, he could see the woman more clearly. Catherine Mitchell, the name came to him from somewhere, perhaps overheard when she first arrived with colleagues. Her shoulders were squared despite her discomfort, chin lifted in the practiced poise of someone accustomed to holding her ground in boardrooms and courthouses. But here, trapped against the polished mahogany by two men whose tailored shirts couldn't quite disguise the aggression beneath her composure, was cracking. "Excuse me," she said, the words distinct even across the restaurant. "I've made it clear I'm not interested. Please step aside." The taller of the men, Derek Sullivan, Jack would later learn, leaned closer, his smile all teeth and no warmth. "Come on, Katie. We're just being friendly. One drink won't kill your career." The second man, Marcus Webb, moved slightly, blocking her path to the door with casual deliberation. "Unless you think you're too good for us now that you're at Mitchell & Barnes, that prestigious firm making you forget your old friends." Catherine's eyes darted to the bartender, who suddenly found something fascinating to clean at the far end of the counter. "We were never friends," she said, her voice level but edged. "And it's Catherine. Now, please move." Inside Jack, two instincts warred. The promise he'd made to Rachel in the hospital 3 years ago, her hand cool and light in his. "Promise me you'll leave the war behind, Jack. Sophie needs her father whole." And against it, the older promise sworn under a different kind of fluorescent light, surrounded by men who became more than brothers. "I will defend those who cannot defend themselves." Sophie's small voice pulled him back. "Dad," she really looked scared. Jack's decision was already made. He placed his napkin carefully on the table beside his plate, as if it were the most ordinary gesture in the world. Then he leaned closer to Sophie, his voice soft but firm. "Stay right here, sweetheart. Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing. Don't move until I come back." Her lips parted, an instinct to protest forming, but the authority in his tone stilled her. She nodded once reluctantly, her fingers gripping the edge of the table, as though anchoring herself in place. Jack pushed his chair back, the scrape of wood against tile drawing no attention compared to the laughter from the bar. As he rose, Derek's hand finally brushed against Catherine's sleeve. She pressed back into the wall, her eyes darting around the room in a silent plea. No one met her gaze, no one except Jack. Jack moved with the calm deliberation of someone who understood the weight of choices. Every step he took away from his daughter and toward the bar felt measured, precise, not rushed, not hesitant, but inevitable. His height and steady frame didn't make him the largest man in the restaurant, yet there was a gravity in his posture that drew quiet attention even before his words. Sophie's small voice followed him in a whisper, though he didn't turn back. "Be careful, Dad." He heard her, every syllable etched into him, and it anchored his resolve. This wasn't about confrontation for the sake of pride. It was about the example he would set for her, what she would remember years from now when faced with her own choices. Would she recall her father shrinking into silence? Or would she remember that he stood when no one else would? Catherine tried again to sidestep the men, but they shifted with her, a choreographed wall closing in. Derek leaned closer, his words low but audible. "Come on, just one drink. Don't make it difficult." Her voice broke slightly. I said no. Jack's pace didn't quicken, though his heartbeat did. He placed his hand gently on the counter near the bar, the action drawing Catherine's startled eyes toward him. For a fraction of a second, relief flickered there, quickly replaced by disbelief. Someone was actually stepping forward. Jack closed the final distance. His presence suddenly filled the narrow space between Catherine and her pursuers. His face, moments ago warm and amused at Sophie's jokes, had shifted into something sharper, controlled, unreadable, but firm enough to demand attention. Derek straightened, clearly irritated by the interruption. Hey, buddy, mind your own business. His smirk was the kind worn by men accustomed to getting away with too much for too long. Jack's eyes didn't leave Catherine. He angled his body slightly, creating space for her to breathe. His stance protective without being theatrical. Then his voice came steady and low, the kind of tone that left no room for argument. Excuse me, gentlemen. I think the lady would like to be left alone. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that turned heads from nearby tables. Catherine blinked and almost stunned by how unshaken he sounded. Derek and Marcus exchanged a glance, their amusement faltering at the lack of hesitation in his voice. For Jack, it wasn't a question of whether they would comply. It was a question of how far they were willing to test his patience before realizing they should. The restaurant's hum of chatter softened as people sensed a shift. Silverware stilled. Conversations trailed off. And in that suspended moment, everyone waited to see what would happen next. For a moment, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Jack's words hung in the air like a challenge that no one else had dared to make. The men stared at him, the smirks curling back onto their faces, but the ease behind them was thinner now, forced. Derek leaned forward, his breath thick with alcohol, his voice dripping with mockery. And who exactly are you supposed to be, her boyfriend? Her babysitter? He barked out a laugh, nudging Marcus as though he'd said something clever. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't rise to the bait or break eye contact. He simply shifted his stance, placing one foot slightly forward, his shoulders squared. Calm, immovable. I said, let her go. Marcus's grin widened, though there was an edge of irritation creeping in. What if we don't? He asked, his tone light, but his jaw tightening beneath the surface. His hand still lingered near Catherine's arm, as if to prove he wasn't about to take orders from a stranger. Catherine pressed back against the wall, her eyes darting between them, her breathing uneven. She seemed to want to speak, maybe to beg Jack not to make things worse, but no words came. Her silence was its own kind of plea. From across the room, Sophie sat rigid in her chair, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. She couldn't hear every word, but she didn't need to. She saw her pastor's posture, the set of his shoulders, and knew he was standing between danger and someone who needed help. Jack kept his voice steady, quieter now, but sharper to hear, the kind of tone that forced the listener to lean in. You heard her say no. That should have been enough. Derek tilted his head, examining Jack more carefully. Something in Jack's stance made him pause, a flicker of recognition passing across his face. His eyes narrowed, taking in the way Jack held himself, the economy of movement, the absolute stillness that spoke of training rather than fear. You military? Derek asked the question, cutting through the mockery that had dominated his tone until now. Jack's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. Once. Derek's posture changed subtly, a slight straightening of his spine, an unconscious response to the confirmation. Marines, I did a tour in Helmand. There was a note of something like respect, now grudging, but present. SEAL, Jack replied, simply. The single word landed like a stone in still water. Around them, whispers rippled from table to table. Derek's smirk faltered entirely now, replaced by something more complex, a mixture of challenge and caution. Marcus, however, seemed unimpressed too, caught in his own resentment to register the significance. Oh, we've got a hero here. Marcus sneered, his voice rising. Some washed-up soldier thinking he can play white knight in a bar. His hand finally moved from near Catherine, but only to jab a finger at Jack's chest. Derek shot his friend a warning look. Marcus, man, maybe we should. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was watching Jack, waiting for the reaction his words were designed to provoke. When Jack remained impassive, Marcus's face flushed darker with alcohol and anger. What's wrong? SEAL can't handle a real fight without your government toys. Jack said nothing. His silence was his own form of control, a refusal to be baited that seemed to infuriate Marcus more than any retort could have. Catherine used the moment to edge slightly away from the wall, her movement catching Marcus's attention. "Where do you think you're going?" he snapped, reaching for her wrist. "We're not done talking." Jack moved then, a single fluid step that placed him between Catherine and Marcus's outstretched hand. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be called aggression, just a simple, effective interposition. "I think you are." The tension pulled tighter. Derek seemed caught between loyalties, the camaraderie of shared military experience versus years of friendship with Marcus. He glanced toward the exit, then back at his friend, indecision clear in every line of his body. "Come on, let's get out of here. Not worth it." But Marcus was beyond listening. The alcohol, the rejection, the accumulated frustrations of a man who'd rarely heard the word no had formed a volatile mixture. "Get out of my way," he growled at Jack, his control fraying visibly. "Go home," Jack said quietly. "Sleep it off. Tomorrow you'll be glad this didn't go further." It was the wrong thing to say, or perhaps given what followed exactly the right thing. Marcus's patience snapped. He lunged forward, his fist cutting through the air in a sloppy arc aimed at Jack's jaw. The swing carried the reckless confidence of someone used to intimidating others into submission. But Jack didn't retreat. His body shifted with instinctive precision, a smooth sidestep that made the strike glance past him harmlessly. He didn't counter, didn't grab, didn't escalate, just avoided with a minimum of movement, conserving energy, letting Marcus's momentum carry him off balance. Gas rippled through the restaurant. Derek stepped back, his expression a complex mixture of embarrassment and reluctant admiration. Catherine pressed herself against the bar, eyes wide, as Marcus recovered and spun back toward Jack, face flushed with rage and humiliation. "You son of a—" The rest of his words were lost as he charged forward again, this time with both arms outstretched as if to tackle Jack to the ground. Jack sidestepped again, but this time his hand came up, catching Marcus's arm at the wrist and elbow in a simple control hold. He applied just enough pressure to direct Marcus's momentum downward, using the man's own weight and force against him. Marcus found himself suddenly on one knee, the arm extended awkwardly, Jack's grip preventing him from rising without considerable pain. "Stop now," Jack said, his voice still level, betraying no strain, "before this gets worse for you." From across the restaurant, the manager finally approached, his expression a mixture of concern and annoyance. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to—" "Call the police," Jack interrupted, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "This man was harassing a woman and assaulted me when I intervened." The manager hesitated, his eyes darting between Jack and Marcus. "These gentlemen are regulars. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding." Catherine stepped forward, and then her professional composure reasserting itself. "It's not a misunderstanding. These men wouldn't let me leave when I asked repeatedly. This man," she nodded toward Jack, "was the only one who stepped in to help." The manager's expression shifted, discomfort replacing certainty. "Mr. Webb's family owns half the waterfront properties in this district. His father and I go way back." Jack understood then. The connections, the reasons staff had been reluctant to intervene. It wasn't just bystander apathy, it was the quiet tyranny of local influence. He'd seen it before in small towns and big cities alike. The invisible lines of power that protected some and left others vulnerable. Derek, seemingly sobered by the turn of events, placed a hand on the manager's shoulder. "Look, we've all had too much to drink. Let me get Marcus home and we'll forget the whole thing. No need for police." Jack maintained his hold on Marcus, who had stopped struggling, but whose eyes blazed with resentment. "That's not your decision to make," Jack said evenly. "It's hers." He nodded toward Catherine. All eyes turned to her. Catherine stood straighter, smoothing her jacket with an unconscious gesture that seemed to help her gather her thoughts. Her gaze moved from Marcus to Derek, then settled on Jack. Something passed between them, a moment of understanding, of shared principle in a room that had abandoned it. "I don't want trouble," she said finally, "but I also don't want this to happen to someone else who might not have help nearby." It was a diplomat's answer, carefully calibrated. Not pressing charges, but not pretending nothing had happened either. Jack respected the choice, even as he recognized the calculation behind it. In a town where Marcus's family held influence, there were consequences to consider beyond this evening. Jack slowly released Marcus's arm, stepping back to give him space to rise. "You heard the lady. Go home. And next time a woman says no, listen the first time. Marcus stood rubbing his wrist, his expression dark with humiliation, and promised retribution. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he muttered, straightening his rumpled shirt. Neither do you, Jack replied simply. Derek grabbed Marcus's shoulder, steering him toward the exit. Let's go, man. It's done. There was relief in his voice, but as they passed Jack, Derek paused. A moment of soldier-to-soldier recognition passed between them. No words, just a slight nod that acknowledged what had and hadn't happened here tonight. Then they were gone, the door swinging shut behind them. The restaurant remained suspended in that strange silence that follows averted violence. Then slowly conversations resumed. Silverware clinked against plates. The mundane rhythm of dinner service reasserted itself as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. But something had shifted. Glances followed Jack as he turned back to Catherine, her composure intact but her hands betraying a slight tremor. Thank you, she said, her voice steadier than her hands. I was handling it, but thank you. Jack nodded, understanding the complexity behind her words. The professional woman who needed to believe she could handle herself balanced against the human being, grateful not to face threat alone. You're welcome, he said simply. Across the restaurant, Sophie sat watching her dinner, forgotten, her eyes wide with a mixture of worry and something else, pride perhaps, or a new understanding of her father. Jack gestured for her to stay put a moment longer as he made sure Catherine was truly all right. Can I call someone for you, he asked. Someone to pick you up. Catherine shook her head, drawing a deep breath that seemed to center her. I'm fine. Really. My car's just outside, and I only had one glass of wine hours ago. She glanced toward the door where Marcus and Derek had exited. They won't be back tonight. They're all bluster when sober. Jack wasn't so certain, but he nodded. If you're sure. She looked at him more carefully now, taking in the details she'd missed in the heat of confrontation. The calluses on his hands that spoke of physical work. The straight posture that wasn't practiced but ingrained, the quiet confidence that came not from arrogance but experience. SEAL, huh? Former, Jack corrected. Construction foreman. All we're showing him it now. Something like approval flickered in her eyes. Quite a career change. Not as much as you might think. Still building things that need to stand up under pressure. The hint of a smile touched her lips. Well, thank you, former SEAL. Not many people would have stepped in. Jack glanced around the restaurant at the diners who had returned to their meals as if nothing had happened. More should have. He looked back at her. Will you be okay getting to your car? Catherine nodded, gathering her purse and jacket with deliberate movements. I will. And she hesitated as if debating whether to continue. I'll remember what you did. In a world where most people just watch you acted, that matters. Jack didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded again. As Catherine walked toward the door, her composure fully restored, Jack returned to his table where Sophie waited with 1,000 questions in her eyes. Is she okay? Were the first words out of her mouth as Jack slid back into his seat. She's fine, Jack assured her, amazed as always by his daughter's capacity for concern about others. Those men were bothering her, but they've gone now. Sophie's eyes were solemn. They were scary, but you weren't scared at all. Jack considered how to answer truthfully without frightening her. Being brave doesn't mean not feeling fear, Soph. It means doing what's right, even when you're afraid. Were you afraid? A little, he admitted. Not of getting hurt, but of making things worse instead of better. Sophie processed this, her forehead furrowing in the way it did when she was thinking deeply. But you helped anyway. Yes. Because it was the right thing to do. Yes. The simplicity of the exchange seemed to satisfy her. She picked up her fork, pushed the now cold macaroni around her plate, then looked up at Jack with that disarming directness children sometimes have. Mom would be proud of you. The words caught him unexpectedly, a sudden tightness forming in his throat. Rachel had been gone 3 years now, but moments like this made her absence freshly acute. He wondered what she would have thought watching him tonight. Would she have seen it as breaking his promise to leave violence behind, or keeping his deeper promise to remain the man she had fallen in love with, someone who couldn't stand by when others were threatened? I hope so, sweetheart, he managed finally. I hope so. The remainder of their dinner passed quietly. Sophie's appetite had returned, though Jack found himself going through the motions, his mind replaying the confrontation analyzing what he could have done differently better. Old habits from his training that never quite faded. As they finished their meal and Jack signaled for the check, the manager approached their table. His earlier discomfort had been replaced by a deferential politeness that struck Jack as equally disingenuous. "Your meal tonight is on the house, sir," he said, his voice pitched low enough that nearby tables couldn't hear. "And I want to apologize for the incident. Mr. Webb and his friend have been valued customers, but that doesn't excuse their behavior." Jack met the man's eyes steadily. "It's not me you should be apologizing to." The manager had the grace to look embarrassed. "Ms. Mitchell is a regular as well. I've already spoken with her by phone. She was understanding." Jack doubted that, but he nodded, unwilling to prolong the conversation with Sophie listening. "Thank you for the meal, but that's not necessary." "I insist," the manager persisted. "It's the least we can do." Jack relented, recognizing the gesture for what it was: not generosity, but damage control. "Thank you," he said, finally helping Sophie with her jacket. As they prepared to leave, the manager cleared his throat, clearly wanting to say something more. "Mr. Foster," he began, then hesitated. "Those men, Mr. Webb particularly, his family has significant influence in this town. They own businesses' property. They're not people who forget slights easily." It was a warning delivered awkwardly but sincerely. Jack appreciated the intent, if not the implication, that he should have minded his own business. "I understand," he said simply. "Good night." Outside, the evening had cooled, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of the nearby river. Sophie slipped her hand into his as they walked toward the parking lot, her fingers warm against his calloused palm. For a while they walked in silence, the streetlights casting long shadows as they made their way toward the car. Finally, she broke the quiet. "Dad," she asked softly, tilting her head to look up at him, "why did you stop being a SEAL?" The question was unexpected but not entirely surprising. Sophie had heard him mention his service before, but he rarely discussed details, and she had never asked directly. Jack considered how much to tell her, how to frame the complexity of choices that had led him from one life to another. "After your mom got sick," he began carefully, "I realized I needed to be home more. The teams, they take you away a lot, for long stretches, into dangerous places." Was it scary being a SEAL? Jack thought about the truth of it, the adrenaline, the fear that sharpened rather than paralyzed, the absolute focus that made everything else fall away. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but we trained so much that when scary moments came, we knew exactly what to do. That helps." "Like tonight?" Sophie asked, connecting the dots with a child's direct logic. "You knew what to do to help that lady." "Something like that." Sophie was quiet for a moment, digesting this. Then, with the abrupt subject change only children can manage seamlessly, "Did you see her face when you stood up for her? She looked at you like you were Superman." Jack laughed softly, the tension of the evening finally beginning to dissipate. "I'm pretty sure that's not what she was thinking." "It was," Sophie insisted, "and I was thinking it too." She squeezed his hand tighter. "You're my hero, Dad, always." Those words struck deeper than any applause or recognition from strangers ever could. They rooted in him like an anchor, reminding him of the truth he already knew. It didn't take a battlefield and or a uniform to be what the world needed. Sometimes it was as simple as listening to your child, noticing someone in danger, and refusing to stay silent. As they reached the car, Jack opened the door for Sophie, watching her climb inside with the ease of a child who trusted fully, completely. He looked once more at the restaurant behind them, its lights glowing warmly against the night. Then he let the door close. Later that night, after Sophie was tucked into bed, her breathing deep and even with sleep, Jack sat at his kitchen table, a mug of cooling coffee before him. The house was quiet in the way only single-parent homes get, a stillness that was both peaceful and lonely. The absence of another adult presence felt most keenly in these late hours. His phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but the content made the sender immediately clear. "Thank you again for tonight. I've been handling difficult men in boardrooms for years, but this was different. I froze and you didn't. I won't forget it. Catherine Mitchell, the woman from the Riverview Grill." Jack stared at the message, wondering how she'd gotten his number, then remembered giving his contact information to the manager in case the police needed a statement. He typed a simple reply, "You're welcome. Hope you're okay. Jack Foster." The response came quickly. "I am. Better for knowing there are still people willing to step up when it matters. Jack set the phone down, not sure what else to say. He hadn't intervened for thanks or recognition. He'd done it because it was necessary, because his daughter was watching, because some instincts ran too deep to ignore. The quiet part of him that had awakened tonight, the part that remembered what it meant to stand between threat and innocent, wasn't quite ready to go back to sleep. In his bedroom, Jack opened the closet and reached for the small lockbox on the top shelf. The combination came to his fingers automatically: Rachel's birthday. Inside, nestled among important papers and a few keepsakes, lay his Navy Cross awarded for an operation in Yemen that was still classified. He rarely looked at this symbol of a life he'd stepped away from, but tonight it seemed important to remember who he had been, who he still was, beneath the hard hat and tool belt. The metal felt heavy in his palm, the weight of memory more than metal. The citation spoke of extraordinary heroism, but what Jack remembered most was simpler, doing what needed to be done when others couldn't or wouldn't. Tonight had been no different, just a smaller scale, a different battlefield. He replaced the metal in its box, locked it away again, and returned to the kitchen. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a turtle, was a drawing Sophie had made last week. A tall figure standing beside a smaller one, both with oversized smiles beneath a yellow sun. "Me and Dad building our future," she had written across the top in careful, determined letters. Jack touched the paper gently. This was his mission now. Not classified operations or midnight raids, but raising a daughter who noticed when others were afraid, who expected action rather than apathy, who believed her father was a hero, not because of medals in boxes, but because he did the right thing when it mattered. He returned to the table, picked up his phone, and typed one more message to Catherine. "Just did what anyone should have done. Take care." As he set the phone down, Jack knew he hadn't seen the last of tonight's events. In a town where the Webb family held influence, there would be ripples. But for now, in the quiet of his home with his daughter sleeping safely down the hall, Jack Foster, construction foreman, single father, former SEAL, felt at peace with his choices. The warrior in him hadn't disappeared after all. It had simply found a different battle to fight, a different person to protect. And in that protection of Sophie, of strangers like Catherine, of the values he wanted his daughter to inherit, Jack had found a purpose as meaningful as any mission he'd ever undertaken. He finished his coffee, turned out the lights, and headed to bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own challenges. A construction site waiting for his direction. A daughter needing lunch packed and homework checked. A normal life that occasionally, as tonight, had proven brushed against the extraordinary. And when it did, Jack Foster would be ready. The first hint that something had changed came on Monday morning. Jack had just arrived at the construction site, thermos of coffee in one hand, hard hat in the other, when he noticed his crew gathered in an unusual huddle near the trailer that served as their office. Normally, the men would be dispersed across the site by now, checking materials, reviewing plans, preparing for the day ahead. But today they stood in a tight circle, heads bent over someone's phone, voices rising and falling in animated discussion. Jack approached slowly, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. The conversation died as he drew near, replaced by a sudden, awkward silence. 12 pairs of eyes flicked toward him, then away, a mixture of curiosity and something like respect in their expressions. "Morning," Jack said, his tone neutral. "Problem with the schedule." Mike Donovan, his second in command, and the closest thing he had to a friend on the crew, stepped forward. Mike was a former Army Ranger, the only other veteran on the team, and there had always been an unspoken understanding between them. Now Mike held out his phone screen, facing Jack. "You're all over social media, boss." The video played in grainy, slightly tilted footage, clearly shot by a restaurant patron with a shaky hand. Jack watched himself approach the bar where Catherine stood cornered. The confrontation unfolded in compressed digital clarity. Marcus's lunge, Jack's evasion, the efficient takedown. The footage ended with Jack standing over Marcus, seemingly unruffled, while the restaurant patrons stared in disbelief. 300,000 views since last night, Mike said quietly. Someone titled it, "Navy SEAL Protects Woman from Drunk Attackers." Jack handed the phone back, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Anonymity had been his shield since leaving the teams, a deliberate choice to protect himself and Sophie from the shadows that sometimes followed men like him home from war. Now that shield was cracking, exposing him to scrutiny he'd never wanted. "It's just a bar fight," Jack said, his voice deliberately casual. Happens every weekend. Let's focus on today's pour. We've got 6 yards of concrete coming at 11. But as he walked away, Jack felt the eyes of his crew following him, seeing him differently now. The quiet, competent foreman who kept to himself had suddenly revealed another layer, and there would be no folding it neatly away again. The concrete truck arrived at 10:45, 15 minutes early, forcing Jack to accelerate the final preparations. He worked alongside his men, checking rebar placement, verifying the formwork, his mind split between the immediate tasks and the implications of that video. His phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket messages from numbers he didn't recognize, so social media notifications he never used, even a local news reporter seeking comment. He ignored them all, focusing on the physical reality of the work before him. By mid-afternoon, the concrete was poured, screeded, and beginning to set. Jack stood at the edge of the new foundation, wiping sweat from his brow, when Mike approached again. "There's someone here to see you," he said, gesturing toward the site entrance where a sleek black Audi had parked. Catherine Mitchell stepped out of the car, looking startlingly out of place among the dirt machinery and half-constructed building. Her charcoal suit had been replaced by cream-colored trousers and a navy blazer, but the professional polish remained intact. She scanned the site until her eyes landed on Jack, then started walking toward him, with the confident stride of someone accustomed to entering rooms where she might be the only woman present. Jack met her halfway, conscious of his dusty clothes and the curious glances from his crew. "Ms. Mitchell," he greeted her, removing his hard hat. "This is unexpected." Catherine smiled, the expression transforming her face in a way it hadn't during their brief interaction at the restaurant. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything critical, and please call me Catherine. Just checking our foundation pour. What brings you to my dusty corner of Austin?" Catherine glanced around the construction site, taking in the scale of the project. "Partly I wanted to thank you properly for last night. Text messages seemed insufficient." She hesitated, then added, "And partly I wanted to warn you, Marcus Webb isn't the type to let public humiliation go unanswered." Jack had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a ripple of concern through him, not for himself, but for the potential complications it might bring to Sophie's life. "I appreciate the warning. How do you know Webb?" Catherine's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "We attended the same law school. He didn't finish, family business called him back, but he maintained connections. In legal circles here, the Webb name opens doors." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "Last night wasn't the first time he's been inappropriate with women, just the first time someone intervened." The implications settled between them like something physical. Jack thought of Sophie, of the world she would navigate as she grew older, of men like Marcus Webb, who viewed entitlement as birthright. "Has he contacted you since last night?" "Not directly, but his father's firm is a major client of my firm. There have been inquiries about what happened." Catherine's professional veneer cracked slightly, frustration bleeding through. "The legal world in this city is smaller than you'd think. Everyone knows everyone. There are ripples." Jack understood ripples. In the team's actions created consequences that spread outward, affecting alliances, changing operational parameters, sometimes for years afterward. "Are you in trouble at work?" Catherine's laugh held little humor. "Not officially, but there's been a distinct chill. The senior partners have concerns about my judgment." Her fingers formed air quotes around the phrase. "Apparently I should have handled the situation more discreetly," by which they mean you should have endured it quietly. Precisely. The bitterness in her voice struck a chord with Jack. He recognized the frustration of systems that protected the wrong people, of institutions that valued peace over justice. He'd seen it in the military and local politics, in the invisible hierarchies that governed communities like theirs. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Catherine shook her head. "Don't be. I'm not. What happened last night needed to happen." She met his eyes directly. "Which brings me to my other reason for coming here. I want to offer you legal representation pro bono if Marcus decides to pursue any action against you." Jack's eyebrows rose. "You think he might sue me? Or worse, try to press assault charges? The Webbs don't handle perceived insults well, and they have the resources to make problems for people who cross them." She handed him a business card. "My personal cell is on the back. Call me if anything happens, Letters, calls from police, anything. Jack took the card, turning it over in his calloused fingers. I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to create more complications for you. Catherine's eyes hardened slightly. This isn't about you or me. It's about showing men like Marcus that actions have consequences, their actions, not ours. She glanced at her watch. I should go. I have a deposition at 3, but please call if you need anything. As she turned to leave, Jack found himself speaking. Catherine. She paused, looking back. Be careful. Men with wounded pride can be unpredictable. Something flashed in her eyes, a recognition perhaps of dangers navigated long before meeting him. I know. I've been taking self-defense classes for the past year. That's why last night was so frustrating. All that training and I still froze. Jack nodded, understanding the disconnect between training and real-world application. Training prepares you. Experience proves you. You haven't had the experience yet. A slight smile touched her lips. That's actually helpful to hear. Thank you. Jack watched her walk back to her, a figure of composed elegance against the raw skeleton of his construction project. Only after she drove away did he notice Mike standing nearby, a knowing expression on his weathered face. Not a word, Jack warned, though there was no heat in it. Mike raised his hands in mock surrender. Wasn't going to say anything, except that the lady lawyer seems to know what she's talking about. The Webbs own half the waterfront development, 3 hotels downtown, and have the mayor's brother-in-law on their payroll. If they've got you in their sights... He left the sentence unfinished. Jack slipped Catherine's card into his pocket. Let them look. I've got work to do. But as the day progressed, Jack found his attention split between the immediate task of construction management and the potential threat looming on the horizon. By 4:30, when he called an end to the workday, his mind was churning with contingency plans, habits from his former life that had never fully faded. The drive to Sophie's school took 15 minutes in afternoon traffic. Jack used the time to center himself, to transition from site foreman to father, shedding the day's concerns like dusty work clothes. Sophie was waiting at the pickup area, her backpack festooned with keychains and buttons, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that was already coming loose after a day of 4th-grade energy. She climbed into the truck with her usual bounce, talking before she'd even closed the door. Dad, guess what Allie saw you on Instagram? Her mom showed her the video from the restaurant. Everyone's talking about it. Jack felt his stomach drop. He'd hoped to shield Sophie from the social media circus, to explain last night's events on his own terms. Now that buffer was gone. What exactly did Allie say? Sophie buckled her seatbelt, oblivious to his concern. She said you were like a superhero, how you stopped those bad men so fast. And then Jaden said his dad said you must be ex-military. And I told them you were a SEAL and they thought that was so cool. Her enthusiasm faltered slightly as she registered his expression. Are you mad? Jack softened his face immediately. No, sweetheart, not mad, just surprised. He pulled away from the curb, joining the procession of parents leaving the school. People are making a bigger deal out of this than it really was. But you helped that lady when no one else would. That is a big deal. The simple clarity of a child's perspective. Jack couldn't argue with her logic, even as he wished for a world where such actions weren't noteworthy. How was school today? Apart from discussing your old man's viral video debut, Sophie launched into a detailed account of classroom politics, art projects, and lunchroom trades. Jack listened with half his attention, the other half scanning the rearview mirror with ingrained caution. Nothing unusual, just normal afternoon traffic, but the habit of vigilance had reawakened, triggered by Catherine's warning, and the knowledge that he was suddenly visible in ways he hadn't been 24 hours ago. At home, Jack supervised homework while preparing dinner, simple tacos that Sophie could help assemble. They ate at the kitchen table, Sophie still chattering about school friends and projects, Jack offering encouragement and questions at appropriate intervals. It was their normal routine, yet Jack felt the subtle shift beneath it, a current of tension he couldn't fully hide from his perceptive daughter. Dad, Sophie said during a pause in conversation, are those men from the restaurant going to cause more trouble? Jack set down his tacos, surprised by the directness of the question. What makes you ask that? Sophie shrugged, trying for casual but not quite achieving it. I heard you talking to that lady today. Mike called me after school and said she came to your work site. Mental note, have a talk with Mike about boundaries and what is appropriate to share with a 10-year-old. Her name is Catherine. She's a lawyer. She just wanted to say thank you properly. And to warn you, Sophie added, her eyes too knowing for Jack's comfort. I heard that part too. Jack considered deflecting, then decided against it. Sophie deserved honesty presented in an age-appropriate way. Yes, she mentioned that one of the men, Marcus, comes from a family with a lot of influence in town. They might be upset about what happened. It was because you stopped him from being mean to her. Because he was embarrassed in public. Some people, when they feel embarrassed, try to make others feel bad too. Sophie nodded, processing this with the serious concentration she brought to all new information. Like when Maddie was mean to Eliza after Eliza got a better grade on the science project. Similar idea, yes, Jack acknowledged, impressed as always by her ability to find relatable parallels. But you don't need to worry about it. Adult problems are for adults to handle. Sophie pushed a piece of lettuce around her plate, unconvinced. But what if they try to hurt you or get you in trouble? The fear beneath her question pierced Jack's heart. She had already lost one parent. The idea of losing another or seeing him harmed was too real a possibility in her young mind. Sophie, look at me. He waited until she met his eyes. I'm not going anywhere, and I can handle whatever comes my way. That's a promise. She studied his face, searching for reassurance. Because you were a SEAL. Because I'm your dad, and that's the most important job I've ever had. The tension in her small shoulders eased slightly. She nodded, apparently satisfied with his answer, and returned to her dinner. Jack wished he felt as confident as he'd sounded. The truth was, men like Marcus Webb operated in a different arena than he was accustomed to. Not the straightforward dangers of combat, but the murky waters of influence, money, and social leverage. Catherine was right to warn him. He just wasn't sure what form the retaliation might take. After dinner with Sophie engrossed in a book on the living room couch, Jack checked his phone for the first time since Catherine's visit. 23 new messages, most from numbers he didn't recognize. 3 local news outlets requesting interviews. A veterans organization asking him to speak at an event. And 1 text from an unlisted number that made his blood run cold. Should have minded your own business. People who mess with the webs tend to regret it. Jack deleted the message, but its implications lingered. The threat wasn't to him directly, but to the life he'd built, his job, his reputation, his ability to provide stability for Sophie. He glanced at his daughter, curled up with her book, innocently unaware of adult vendettas and power plays. He'd faced far worse dangers than Marcus Webb, but those had threatened only his physical safety, not the delicate ecosystem of his daughter's world. He typed a message to Catherine. Got a threatening text, anonymous number. Nothing specific, just letting me know the webs have reach. Her response came quickly. Document everything, screenshot the text, don't engage, I'm already hearing chatter at the firm. Jack followed her advice, taking a screenshot before deleting the message from his phone. Then he moved through the house, checking locks on windows and doors, not because he expected a physical threat tonight, but because the habits of security were comforting in their familiarity. Better to channel anxiety into action than let it fester. The next morning dawned clear and unseasonably cool for Austin in September. Jack arrived at the construction site early, before most of his crew, wanting to check the previous day's concrete pour and plan the day's tasks without distractions. But as he pulled into the dirt parking area, he immediately noticed something wrong. The security fence had been cut open, the heavy chain link peeled back like wrapping paper. Jack parked and approached cautiously, scanning for movement, for anything out of place beyond the obvious breach. The site appeared deserted, the machinery sitting silent in the early morning light. But as he moved deeper into the construction zone, the damage became evident. Spray paint marred the fresh concrete foundation. Crude words and symbols that would require grinding to remove. Tools had been scattered, some broken. The most expensive equipment, thankfully, appeared untouched. The heavy machinery was likely too difficult to damage quickly and quietly. Jack took photos with his phone, documenting the vandalism with the methodical thoroughness he'd once applied to battlefield intelligence. The damage was significant, but not catastrophic. A delay of a day, maybe 2. Expense, yes, but not a project killer. This was harassment, not destruction, a warning shot. As he examined the graffiti more closely, 1 tag stood out, not random vandalism, but a specific message: heroes welcome. The words sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the morning air. This wasn't just hooliganism, it was targeted, personal. The connection to the viral video was unmistakable. By 7:30, the site was bustling with police, insurance adjusters, and crew members speculating about who might have breached their security. Jack answered questions, filled out reports, and coordinated with the concrete subcontractor about repairs. Through it all, he maintained the calm, authoritative presence his men expected, while inwardly calculating the ripple effects of this escalation. Mid-morning, as the initial crisis management subsided, Jack stepped away to call the project developer, a conversation he'd been dreading. Howard Mercer was a demanding client on the best of days, with little patience for delays or complications. Jack explained the situation as succinctly as possible, emphasizing that the schedule impact would be minimal. Howard's response was unexpected. "I saw the video, Jack, the one from the restaurant." His tone was difficult to read through the phone. "My wife showed it to me. She was impressed. Said it was about time someone stood up to Marcus Webb and his crowd." Jack blinked in surprise. "You know Webb? Know him? I've been dealing with his family for 20 years. They've tried to block 3 of my developments claimed eminent domain on a parcel I was developing 5 years ago and generally made themselves a pain in my ass whenever possible." A pause then. "The vandalism at your site. You think it's connected. Can't prove anything yet, but the timing is suspicious." Howard made a sound somewhere between a snort and a laugh. "Let me make some calls. I've got friends on the city council. People who aren't in the Webb's pocket. We'll get extra police patrols for the site, maybe expedite some permits that have been dragging." Jack hadn't expected an ally in his buttoned-up, bottom-line focused client. "I appreciate that, Howard. Don't thank me yet. Just get the project back on track. And Jack," a pause, "what you did at that restaurant, standing up for that woman when no one else would, that took guts. This city needs more of that, not less." The call ended, leaving Jack with the strange sense that the ground beneath him had shifted yet again. Howard Mercer defending him. The Webbs having enemies beyond Jack himself, the landscape of local power dynamics was more complex than he'd realized. By lunchtime, the immediate crisis had stabilized. The police had filed their report promising increased patrols. The concrete specialists had determined that the surface damage could be repaired without compromising structural integrity. Jack had reorganized the day's tasks, adapting to the new constraints with the flexibility that had once made him an effective team leader in far more volatile environments. He was reviewing the updated schedule when Mike approached, concern etched in the lines around his eyes. "Boss, you need to see this." He held out his phone open to a local news website. The headline made Jack's stomach clench. "Construction foreman in viral restaurant, confrontation tied to controversial military operation." The article was light on specifics. The mission in Yemen remained classified, but heavy on innuendo. It quoted an anonymous military source, claiming Jack had been involved in an operation that resulted in civilian casualties, one that had sparked internal investigations before being buried by higher authorities. No concrete accusations, just enough murky implications to cast a shadow. "This is bullshit," Mike said quietly. "They're trying to smear you." Jack handed the phone back, his expression carefully neutral, despite the anger simmering beneath. "It's a strategy. Discredit the man, discredit his actions." The Webbs, probably, they have the resources to dig up half-truths and spin them. Jack glanced around the site where his crew was gradually returning to work. "Let's focus on what we can control. We've got a building to finish." But as the afternoon progressed, the digital assault continued. Jack's phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications from social media accounts. He rarely used tags, mentions messages from strangers, alternately praising him as a hero or condemning him as a war criminal. The local news picked up the story, then regional outlets. By 3 o'clock, Howard Mercer called again, his earlier supportive tone replaced by cautious concern. "Jack, I'm getting questions from investors. This article about your military service, is there any truth to it?" Jack gripped the phone tighter. "The mission they're referencing was classified. I can't discuss details. But the implications they're making, civilian casualties, cover-ups, that's not what happened." A heavy silence on the line. "I believe you, but perception matters in this business. My partners are nervous." "I understand," Jack said, though the words tasted bitter. "What do you need from me?" "Just Keep your head down. Focus on the project. Let this news cycle play out and die down. Howard paused. And maybe consider taking a few days off just until this blows over. The suggestion landed like a physical blow. You're asking me to step away from my own site. Temporarily, Mike can handle things. It's not a reflection on your work, Jack. It's just politics, Jack finished for him. Optics. Exactly. The relief in Howard's voice was palpable. Just a few days, paid leave, of course. Jack wanted to argue to defend his reputation, to explain that stepping back would look like an admission of guilt. But he recognized the futility. Howard was protecting his investment, his relationships, his own standing in the business community. It was a rational calculation, if a cowardly one. I'll finish today, Jack said finally. Hand over to Mike properly. But I want your word that my position is secure once this dies down. Absolutely. You're the best foreman I've worked with in 20 years. This is just a temporary measure. Jack ended the call and stood motionless for a long moment, absorbing the impact of this latest blow. Being sidelined from his own project stung more than he'd expected. The construction site had become his anchor after leaving the millionaire, a place where his skills translated, where he could build rather than destroy, where the chain of command was clear and the objectives concrete. Now that anchor was being pulled away, at least temporarily. He found Mike by the material storage area inventorying lumber deliveries. The conversation was brief, professional. Mike accepted the temporary promotion with obvious discomfort and assuring Jack he'd keep the project on track until Jack's return. The rest of the crew received the news with varying degrees of confusion and concern. Jack framed it as a short break to deal with the media situation, emphasizing his confidence in the team's ability to continue in his absence. By 4 o'clock, Jack had cleared his personal items from the site trailer and was driving towards Sophie's school an hour earlier than usual. His mind raced with contingencies, with explanations for his unexpected free time, with strategies to shield Sophie from the increasingly public scrutiny of their lives. Sophie emerged from the school building with her usual energy, then stopped short when she spotted him waiting outside the truck rather than in the pickup line. Her expression shifted instantly from surprise to concern. "Dad, what's wrong? Why are you here early?" Jack forced a smile, bending to hug her. "Nothing's wrong. I wrapped up early today, thought we might do something fun this afternoon. How about ice cream before dinner?" Sophie studied his face with that unnerving perception that children sometimes possess. "Is this because of the restaurant? Are you in trouble?" Jack hesitated, balancing honesty against protection. "Not trouble exactly, but the video has stirred up some attention I wasn't expecting. My boss thought it might be good for me to take a few days off until things calm down." Sophie's brow furrowed. "They're punishing you for helping someone. That's not fair." "It's complicated, Soph. Sometimes adults make decisions based on appearances rather than what's right." He opened the passenger door for her. "Come on, let's not let it ruin our afternoon." At the ice cream shop, Jack watched Sophie deliberate between flavors with her usual seriousness of purpose, grateful for the momentary normality. They secured a table near the window, Sophie digging into her mint chocolate chip, while Jack picked at his vanilla, his appetite diminished by the day's events. "Dad," Sophie said between bites, "if you're not working for a few days, does that mean you could come to my class tomorrow? It's show and share day, and Ms. Brennan said parents are welcome." Jack felt a pang of guilt for the times his work schedule had prevented him from participating in school activities. "I'd love to, sweetheart. What are you sharing?" "My art project about heroes. I was going to bring the medal Mom got for her charity work, but..." She hesitated, then plunged ahead with childlike directness. "Could I bring you instead? You're a real hero like in my project." The request caught Jack off guard. "No, mind." "Sophie, I'm not..." "You are," she interrupted with the absolute certainty only children can muster. "Ms. Brennan said heroes are people who help others even when it's hard or scary. That's what you did at the restaurant." Jack struggled to find the right words. The idea of being presented to a classroom of fourth graders as a hero made him profoundly uncomfortable, especially with the current media narrative swirling around him. "I appreciate that, Soph, but please." Her eyes, so like Rachel's, were pleading. "Everyone's talking about the video anyway. At least this way they'd hear the truth from you." Jack sighed, recognizing the impossible position. Refuse and Sophie would be disappointed, possibly even embarrassed among peers who'd already seen the viral video. Agree, and he risked further public exposure plus the awkwardness of explaining appropriate levels of force to 10-year-olds. Tell you what, he compromised. I'll come to your class, but not as a hero. I'll talk about my job, building things, how construction teams work together, maybe bring some blueprints. And if someone asks about the restaurant, I'll answer honestly but simply. Deal. Sophie considered this spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Deal. But you are a hero, Dad, whether you admit it or not. Jack managed a smile even as he wondered what Rachel would think of all this. Would she be proud of him for standing up for Catherine? Or disappointed that he'd broken his promise to leave violence behind? The questions had no answers. Just the ache of her absence when he needed her perspective most. They were finishing their ice cream when Jack's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number, but local area code. He almost declined it, then changed his mind. Hello. Jack, it's Derek Sullivan from the restaurant. Jack stiffened, immediately alert. How did you get this number? That's not important right now. Listen, we need to talk. Not over the phone. It's about Marcus. He's planning something beyond the vandalism and the news stories. Jack glanced at Sophie, who was watching him with curious eyes. This isn't a good time. Make it a good time, Derek insisted, urgency in his voice. For your kid's sake, if nothing else. Marcus knows where she goes to school. A cold weight settled in Jack's stomach. If this is some kind of threat, it's not a threat from me, it's a warning. I'm trying to do the right thing here. Derek's voice lowered. Look, I was out of line that night. Way out of line. But Marcus is taking this to a level I never signed up for. Meet me at Riverside Park in an hour. By the boat rental kiosk. Come alone. The line went dead before Jack could respond. He stared at the phone line, racing through possibilities. It could be a trap, an attempt to lure him into a compromising situation. Or it could be legitimate. Derek had shown reluctance during the confrontation, had tried to de-escalate when Marcus escalated. If there was a genuine threat to Sophie... Who was that? Sophie asked, scraping the last bits of ice cream from her bowl. Just someone from work, Jack lied, hating the necessity. Listen, sweetheart, would you mind if we stop by Aunt Jenny's on the way home? I just remembered I promised to help her with something. Sophie brightened at the mention of her Aunt Rachel's sister, who lived across town. Can I play with Milo? Milo was Jenny's golden retriever, beloved by Sophie. I'm sure he'd love that. Jack called Jenny from the car, keeping his explanation vague but emphasizing that he needed a favor. Could Sophie stay with her for an hour or two? While he took care of something, Jenny agreed without pressing for details, accustomed to the occasional need for emergency childcare since Rachel's death. After dropping Sophie at Jenny's house with promises to return soon, Jack drove toward Riverside Park, his mind shifting into operational mode. He parked a block away, approaching the meeting point on foot to survey the area before committing. The park was moderately busy with afternoon joggers, dog walkers, and families enjoying the pleasant weather. The boat rental kiosk was visible from multiple angles, with no obvious places for an ambush. Derek was already there, pacing nervously by the closed kiosk, checking his watch repeatedly. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a University of Texas sweatshirt, but his posture was tense, his movements jerky with barely contained anxiety. Jack observed him for several minutes, confirming he appeared to be alone, before approaching from an angle that gave him clear sight lines in all directions. Derek spotted him when he was 20 feet away, relief washing over his face. You came, I wasn't sure you would. Jack stopped at a conversational distance, close enough to speak without raising his voice, but far enough to react if necessary. You mentioned my daughter. That guaranteed my attention. What's this about? Derek glanced around, then gestured to a nearby bench overlooking the river. Can we sit, please? Jack nodded, following him to the bench, but positioning himself with his back to a tree rather than the open path. Derek sat heavily, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Up close, he looked terrible, bloodshot eyes stubbled the general appearance of someone who hadn't slept properly in days. I need to start by saying I'm sorry, Derek began, his voice rough. For the restaurant, for getting involved with Marcus's behavior. I was drunk, but that's no excuse. Jack studied him, looking for signs of deception. Apology noted. Now tell me what this is really about. Derek exhaled slowly. After that night, after the video went viral, Marcus went on a rampage. I've never seen him like this. It's like he's obsessed with getting back at you. The construction site vandalism that was just the beginning. He paid someone to dig into your military record to find anything that could be twisted into a smear campaign. I'm aware of the article. That's just phase one. He's got more planned. He's talking about going after your job, your reputation, making sure you can't work in this town again. Derek paused, his expression grim. And yesterday he mentioned your daughter. Said maybe you'd learn your lesson if something happened at her school, something embarrassing or scary. The cold weight in Jack's stomach transformed into burning anger. If he goes anywhere near my daughter. That's why I'm here, Derek interrupted. I've known Marcus since college. He's always been entitled, always pushed boundaries. But this threatening a kid, it's too far. I can't be part of it anymore. Jack studied Derek more carefully, reassessing. The man before him wasn't the aggressive drunk from the restaurant, but neither was he a complete innocent. Why the change of heart? You seemed happy enough to intimidate Catherine that night. Shame crossed Derek's face. Because I saw myself on that video, really saw myself through other people's eyes. He looked down at his hands. My wife left me 6 months ago, took our son with her, said I'd change, become someone she didn't recognize. Watching that video, I finally saw what she meant. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. Jack said nothing, waiting. I've been going to AA meetings, Derek continued. 3 days sober now. Not much, but it's a start. Part of making amends is stopping further harm. He met Jack's eyes directly. I can't undo what already happened, but I can warn you about what's coming. Jack processed this, weighing the information against his instincts. Derek seemed genuine, the remorse in his eyes matching the tremor in his hands. But intentions aside, the threat to Sophie remained the priority. What exactly is Marcus planning regarding my daughter? Derek shook his head. He was vague about details. Something about having someone approach her at school, scare her, make her feel unsafe. He's got a cousin who works as a substitute teacher, might be planning to use that connection to get access. Jack's mind raced through countermeasures. He could keep Sophie home from school, but for how long? Could contact the principal. But what evidence did he have beyond the word of a self-admitted former drunk? Could confront Marcus directly, but that might escalate the situation further. There's something else you should know, Derek added. Catherine Mitchell, the woman from the restaurant, Marcus is targeting her too. He's pressuring his father to pull their legal business from her firm unless she's fired or reassigned. This new information complicated the picture further. Catherine had already risked her professional standing by offering to help Jack. Now her entire career was in jeopardy because of her connection to him. The ripples were spreading wider than he'd anticipated. I appreciate the warning, Jack said finally. But why should I trust you? You could be setting me up, trying to get me to react in a way that makes things worse. Derek nodded, accepting the suspicion as his due. Fair enough. I can't prove my intentions. All I can say is that seeing you stand up for a stranger that night, while I stood by and did nothing or worse participated, it made me take a hard look at the man I've become. I don't like what I saw. The sincerity in his voice was compelling. Jack had assessed men's character under far more stressful circumstances, had made life or death decisions based on such judgments. His instincts told him Derek was telling the truth, or at least his version of it. What's your plan now? Jack asked. Marcus will figure out you warned me. Derek's smile was grim. Already handled. As far as Marcus knows, I'm on a plane to Houston for a job interview. By the time he realizes I tipped you off, I'll be gone for real. My brother has a construction company in San Antonio. He's offered me a job, a fresh start away from Marcus and his crowd. Jack nodded, respecting the thoroughness of the exit strategy. Stay with your brother. Keep going to meetings. Build something better. That's the plan. Derek stood, extending his hand tentatively. For what it's worth, what you did that night, standing up for someone who needed it, it made a difference. Not just for her, for me too. Jack considered the offered hand, then shook it briefly. Make it count then. As Derek walked away, Jack remained on the bench, processing the new information and its implications. The threat had escalated beyond professional harassment to something more personal, more dangerous. His military training had prepared him for direct confrontation, but this shadow war of influence and intimidation required different tactics. He pulled out his phone and called Catherine. She answered on the second ring, her voice tense. Jack, is everything all right? Not exactly. I just met with Derek Sullivan. He says Marcus is escalating, targeting both of us now. Catherine's intake of breath was audible. What kind of escalation? For you, pressure on your firm to fire you or reassign you away from his family's business. For me, Jack paused, the words sticking in his throat. He's making threats regarding my daughter. Nothing specific, but concerning enough. That's crossing a line, Catherine said, anger edging her voice. Threatening a child is not only despicable, it's potentially criminal. Depending on the nature of the threat, we could be looking at stalking harassment or even terroristic threat statutes. The problem is proof. It's all secondhand from Derek, who's leaving town. But now we know to be vigilant, to document everything. A pause then. Jack, I heard about the construction site in the article. I'm so sorry. This is spiraling because I involved you that night. You didn't involve me, Jack corrected her. I made my own choice, and I'd make it again. The silence that followed held something unspoken, a connection forming through shared adversity. Finally, Catherine spoke again, her voice carrying a new resolve. We need a strategy, not just defensive, but offensive. The Webbs have spent years building a reputation in this city that doesn't match their behavior. Maybe it's time people saw the reality. What are you suggesting? I'm not sure yet, but I have access to certain records, certain case files. Nothing privileged I could share, but enough to start building a clearer picture. Her voice lowered slightly. Come to my office tomorrow. We'll talk more securely there. As Jack ended the call, the sun was beginning to set over the river, casting long shadows across the park. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the turmoil he felt inside. In less than 48 hours, his carefully constructed life had been upended, the boundaries between his past and present blurring in ways he'd never anticipated. He thought of Sophie waiting at Jenny's house, innocent and trusting, of Catherine risking her career to stand against the kind of bullying she'd experienced firsthand, of Derek finding his conscience too late, but perhaps not too late to change, and of Marcus Webb, a man whose entitlement had curdled into something dangerous when challenged. Jack had faced enemies before in distant lands, where the rules of engagement were clear, even when brutal. This was different, a battle fought not with weapons, but with influence, not for territory, but for the right to live unharassed, to maintain dignity in the face of power. As he walked back to his car, Jack felt the warrior in him, fully awakened, not with bloodlust, but with resolve. Some fights couldn't be avoided. Some principles couldn't be compromised. And when the safety of his daughter was at stake, Jack Foster would bring every skill, every resource, every lesson learned in war and peace to bear on the problem before him. This time the battlefield was his own community, and he would not retreat. The strategy meeting with Catherine had been set for 9 o'clock at her law firm's downtown offices. Jack arrived 15 minutes early, navigating the gleaming lobby of Mitchell and Barnes with its marble floors and wall of brass nameplates commemorating partners past and present. The receptionist directed him to the 23rd floor, where Catherine had arranged for a conference room away from the main traffic of the firm. Jack found her waiting, a sleek laptop open before her legal pads and folders arranged in precise stacks. The wall of windows behind her framed the Austin skyline, the morning sun glinting off glass and steel. Catherine looked up as he entered, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Thanks for coming. Coffee. She gestured to a silver carafe on a side table. You look like you need it as much as I do. Jack poured himself a cup, noting the faint shadows beneath Catherine's expertly applied makeup. Rough night. Catherine's fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on her legal pad. The senior partners called a special meeting yesterday evening. The Webb family is threatening to pull all their business, approximately 20% of our annual billings, unless certain personnel adjustments are made. Jack set his coffee down, the implications clear. They want you gone. Or at minimum removed from any cases connected to their interests. Catherine straightened a pen that was already perfectly aligned with her notepad, which would effectively sideline my career here. I've worked 6 years to build my reputation at this firm. Without high-profile client contact, I might as well be a paralegal. Jack studied her, seeing past the professional exterior to the anger beneath. What did the partner say? They're evaluating the situation. Her fingers formed air quotes around the phrase. Translation, they're calculating whether I'm worth the financial hit. The injustice of it tightened Jack's jaw. Here was Catherine being punished professionally for rejecting unwanted advances while Marcus Webb faced no consequences for his behavior. I'm sorry, this is because of what happened at the restaurant. Because I got involved. Catherine shook her head firmly. No, this is because Marcus Webb is a spoiled man-child who can't handle rejection, and his family enables his worst impulses. She drew a deep breath, visibly collecting herself. But we're not here to complain. We're here to develop a counter-strategy. She turned her laptop toward him, revealing a document titled Webb Family Holdings and Litigation History. I've spent the night compiling public records, property transactions, tax assessments, civil suits, regulatory filings. Nothing privileged, nothing that breaches any ethical boundaries. Just connecting dots that were already visible. Jack leaned forward, scanning the document. It was comprehensive, a detailed map of the Webb family's business interests across Austin and beyond, annotated with dates, dollar amounts, and legal actions. This is impressive. But what's the pattern I'm missing? Catherine's expression sharpened, a prosecutor building her case. 3 years ago, the Webbs acquired a string of waterfront properties at suspiciously low prices. 6 months later, the city announced a major redevelopment initiative for that exact area, tripling property values overnight. Inside information. Almost certainly, but that's just the appetizer. Catherine flipped to another document. They've had 7 sexual harassment complaints filed against various executives in their companies over the past decade, all settled quietly with NDAs. Marcus appears in 3 of them. Jack wasn't surprised, but the confirmation of a pattern reinforced his disgust. So he's a repeat offender, and his family cleans up after him. Exactly. And there's more. Catherine's finger traced down a timeline of events. Environmental violations at their development sites. Building code exemptions granted under unusual circumstances. Charitable donations to the mayor's pet projects coinciding with zoning variances. Nothing outright illegal that I can prove, but together. Together, it shows a family that operates above the law, Jack finished, using money and influence to create their own rules. Catherine nodded, satisfaction flickering across her features. Now you're seeing it. The Webbs have spent decades cultivating an image as Austin's benevolent business dynasty, generous philanthropists, job creators, civic leaders. But underneath, they're bullies who use their power to take what they want and punish anyone who stands in their way. Jack thought of Derek's warning of the threats against Sophie of the construction site vandalism. This helps us understand what we're dealing with, but how does it protect us or your job? Catherine leaned back, confidence replacing the tension she'd shown earlier. Information is leverage, Jack. Right now, the Webbs think they hold all the cards. They're used to people backing down to problems disappearing when they apply pressure. But if enough of these patterns became public knowledge, you're talking about exposure. I'm talking about changing the calculation. Catherine's eyes held a determined gleam. The partners are weighing the cost of losing the Webbs business against the cost of sacrificing me. But what if keeping me became less expensive than protecting the Webbs? What if the risk shifted? Jack considered the strategy, impressed by its elegance, but concerned about the escalation it represented. You'd be painting a bigger target on yourself. I already have a target on me, Catherine countered. We both do. The question is whether we wait for the next attack or change the terms of engagement. The phrase resonated with Jack, echoing military principles he'd lived by. Never let the enemy dictate the battlefield. Seize the initiative. Transform disadvantage into advantage. He studied the documents again, seeing them now not just as information, but as potential armor. There are risks, he said finally. Going public against the family with this much influence could backfire. Catherine's expression softened slightly. I know. That's why I wanted to talk to you first. Your daughter is involved now, even if indirectly. You have more to lose than I do. The mention of Sophie focused Jack's thoughts. Derek's warning about Marcus targeting his daughter's school remained foremost in his mind. I've already taken precautions. Spoken with Sophie's principal about monitoring unauthorized visitors, walked her through safety protocols, arranged alternative pickup plans. Smart, Catherine nodded. But reactive. I'm proposing something proactive. Jack's military training had taught him the value of offensive action, of seizing initiative, rather than merely responding to threats. But it had also taught him the importance of proportionality, of not escalating a conflict beyond necessity. What exactly are you suggesting? Catherine tapped her laptop. We don't need to publish all this. Just make it clear to the right people that we could. A strategic leak here, a well-placed question there. Create enough concern that the webs decide we're more trouble than we're worth. The approach was measured, calibrated, not all-out warfare, but calculated pressure. Jack could respect that. Who would you approach first? I have a contact at the Austin Chronicle, a journalist who's been trying to crack the Webb family facade for years. He's trustworthy, discreet until he needs not to be. Catherine's expression grew more serious. But before we do anything, I need to know you're on board. This affects both of us now. Jack thought of Sophie, of the life he'd built for them after Rachel's death, of the principles he wanted to instill in his daughter. What lesson would she learn if he backed down now? That powerful men could threaten children without consequence. That injustice should be endured rather than confronted. I'm in, he said simply, but with one condition. We focus on Marcus and his father, specifically their patterns, their actions. Not the extended family, not innocent employees of their companies. Catherine nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxation of her shoulders. Agreed. Targeted pressure, not collateral damage. She extended her hand across the table. Partners. Jack shook it, feeling the strange alignment of their purposes, the construction foreman and the corporate attorney from different worlds, but united against a common adversary. Partners. They spent the next hour refining their strategy, identifying the most compelling evidence, determining sequence and timing. Catherine would reach out to her journalist contact that afternoon, arranging a confidential meeting for the following day. Jack would document the construction site vandalism and threatening text in a police report, creating an official record of harassment that could later connect to other incidents. As their meeting concluded, Catherine walked Jack to the elevator, their discussion shifting to immediate security concerns. Have you considered home security upgrades? The Webbs know where you live. Jack nodded, having already assessed his home's vulnerabilities with a professional's eye. Installing new locks today, security system tomorrow. I've also spoken with some former teammates who live in the area. They'll be keeping an eye out. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. As Jack stepped in, Catherine held the door briefly. Be careful, Jack. The Webbs won't expect resistance. That makes them both more vulnerable and more dangerous. Jack recognized the warning for what it was: not fear, but tactical awareness. You too. Check in tonight and after you've spoken with your journalist contact. Catherine agreed, and then the elevator doors closed, carrying Jack back to the gleaming lobby and the bright morning beyond. As he drove to Sophie's school for the promised show-and-share visit, his mind processed the meeting with Catherine and analyzing their strategy for weaknesses, anticipating potential counters from the Webbs. The familiar mental exercise of operational planning helped focus his thoughts, channeling concern into productive action. Sophie's school, Oak Ridge Elementary, sat on a tree-lined street in a quiet neighborhood, its brick buildings and colorful playground equipment projecting wholesome security. Jack parked in the visitor lot, checking his surroundings with habitual vigilance before entering through the main doors, where a security guard checked his ID and issued a visitor badge. The fourth grade classroom buzzed with the controlled chaos of 28 children preparing for show and share. Sophie spotted him immediately, breaking away from her friends to race toward him, face alight with excitement. Dad, you came. She grabbed his hand, pulling him toward her desk. Ms. Brennan said you can go third after Eliza shows her rock collection and before Tyler talks about his soccer trophy. Jack allowed himself to be guided, conscious of the curious glances from Sophie's classmates. The video had clearly made the rounds among their parents, filtering down to the children in that distorted way adult concerns often reach young ears. Ms. Brennan, a cheerful woman in her 30s with an air of practiced patience, greeted Jack warmly. Mr. Foster, we're so pleased you could join us today. Sophie's been very excited to introduce you to the class. Jack shook her hand, noting the recognition in her eyes. She'd seen the video too. Thank you for accommodating my visit on short notice. As the children settled into a semicircle on the reading carpet, Jack positioned himself near the teacher's desk, reviewing the simple construction plans he'd brought to share. He'd deliberately chosen blueprints for a public library his company had built the previous year, something meaningful that children could relate to, with enough interesting details to hold their attention. Eliza presented her rock collection first, earnestly explaining the differences between sedimentary and igneous formations while passing specimens around the circle. Then it was Jack's turn, Sophie introducing him with barely contained pride. "This is my dad, Jack Foster. He builds really important buildings as a construction foreman, and he was also a Navy SEAL, which means he's super brave and helps people who are in trouble." The direct reference to the viral video created a ripple of whispers among the children. Jack stepped forward, thanking Sophie with a gentle squeeze of her shoulder before addressing the class. "Good morning, everyone. I brought something special to share with you today, the actual blueprints for the East Austin Public Library that was built last year. Has anyone visited it?" Several hands shot up, and Jack used their enthusiasm to guide the conversation toward construction principles, explaining in simple terms how buildings were designed to withstand storms and earthquakes, how teams of specialists work together to transform paper plans into physical structures. The children asked surprisingly insightful questions, and Jack found himself enjoying the exchange more than he'd expected. Then came the question he'd been anticipating. A freckled boy near the back raised his hand. "My mom showed me a video of you fighting some bad guys at a restaurant. Were you scared?" A hush fell over the classroom, the children suddenly more attentive than they'd been for discussions of concrete foundations. Jack glanced at Sophie, who watched him with absolute confidence, then at Ms. Brennan, who seemed ready to intervene if necessary. "That's a good question," Jack acknowledged, choosing his words carefully. "The truth is, being brave doesn't mean never feeling afraid. It means doing what's right even when you are afraid." He paused, gauging the children's understanding. "I saw someone who needed help, and I had the training to provide that help safely. But the most important thing wasn't what I did, it was noticing that something was wrong in the first place." A girl with tight braids tilted her head curiously. "What do you mean?" Jack thought about how to frame the concept of bystander intervention for fourth graders. "Well, sometimes people see something wrong happening, like someone being bullied or feeling unsafe, and they look away because it seems scary or complicated. But noticing is the first step in helping. You don't have to solve big problems by yourself, but you can always tell a trusted adult if you see someone who needs help." The explanation seemed to satisfy the children, who nodded with serious expressions. Jack finished his presentation with a brief overview of the library's special features: the reading garden, the solar panels on the roof, the colorful children's section with its tree-shaped bookcases. By the time Tyler took the floor with his soccer trophy, the momentary tension had dissipated, replaced by the usual ebb and flow of classroom attention. After show and share concluded, the children returned to their regular lessons, and Jack prepared to leave. Brennan walked him to the door, keeping her voice low. "That was very well handled, Mr. Foster. The video has been a topic of conversation among some parents." Jack nodded, unsurprised. "I appreciate you allowing me to visit today. It meant a lot to Sophie." Ms. Brennan's expression grew more serious. "I should mention there was an incident yesterday afternoon. A man came to the office claiming to be a substitute teacher, but his credentials didn't check out. Security escorted him off campus." The warning from Derek immediately flashed in Jack's mind. "Did you get his name?" He gave the name Thomas Webb, said he was related to the Webb family of Webb Development Group. Ms. Brennan watched Jack's face carefully. "Given recent events, I thought you should know." Jack maintained his composure through sheer force of will, thanking the teacher for her vigilance while his internal alarms blared. Marcus had moved faster than anticipated, already attempting to access Sophie's school under false pretenses. The implied threat was unmistakable. "I can get close to your daughter whenever I want." Jack left the school with renewed determination, calling Catherine as soon as he reached his truck. When she answered, the background noise suggested she was walking between meetings. "The Webb cousin tried to get into Sophie's school yesterday," Jack explained without preamble. "Used his real last name, claimed to be a substitute teacher." Catherine's intake of breath was audible. "That's reckless even for them. School security is no joke these days." "Exactly. He wasn't trying to succeed, he was sending a message." Jack started his truck, scanning the surrounding streets for unfamiliar vehicles. "They're telling us they can reach our vulnerable points." This changes the timeline, Catherine said, her voice hardening with resolve. I'm meeting my journalist contact this afternoon instead of tomorrow. And Jack, we should consider a temporary restraining order against Marcus specifically. This school incident gives us grounds. Jack weighed the suggestion, seeing both its value and its limitations. A restraining order was only as effective as the subject's willingness to obey it, and Marcus had already demonstrated his disregard for boundaries. Still, it would create an official record, another piece in the documentation of harassment. Do it, he agreed. And let's accelerate the rest of the plan too. The sooner we apply pressure, the less time they have to escalate further. After ending the call, Jack drove directly to the police station to file a formal report about the school incident, connecting it to the construction site vandalism and threatening text. The officer who took his statement seemed skeptical at first but grew more attentive as Jack methodically laid out the sequence of events, the pattern of escalation, and the potential threat to his daughter. We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood, the officer promised, and notify the school resource officer at Oak Ridge to be especially vigilant. But Mr. Foster, if these people are as connected as you say, I understand the limitations, Jack acknowledged. He'd seen enough of the world to recognize that official protection had gaps, that systems designed to maintain order often faltered when confronted with wealth and influence. I'm not expecting arrests. I'm establishing a record. By mid-afternoon, Jack had installed new deadbolts on all exterior doors of his home and scheduled a security system installation for the following morning. He'd also reached out to 2 former teammates who lived in the Austin area, men he trusted implicitly, who understood threats and countermeasures better than any security consultant. They agreed to set up an informal surveillance rotation, ensuring that Jack and Sophie wouldn't be facing the Webb family's intimidation alone. Catherine called as Jack was finishing the lock installation on the back door. Meeting with the journalist went well, she reported, her voice pitched low as if concerned about being overheard. His name is Alex Reyes. He's been investigating the Webbs for months, focusing on their development deals with the city. What we provided fills in crucial gaps in his research. Timeline for publication. He's corroborating details, now reaching out to other sources. Says he could have a preliminary piece ready by Monday, focusing on the pattern of harassment and intimidation, with hints at the bigger financial story to follow. Catherine paused. It's going to make waves, Jack. The Webbs won't take this lying down. Good. The word emerged harder than Jack intended, revealing the anger he'd been controlling. They're already targeting a 10-year-old girl. How much worse can it get? That's what worries me, Catherine admitted. We're challenging people who've never faced real consequences. There's no telling how they'll react when cornered. Jack tested the new deadbolt, satisfied with its solid construction. Then we'd better be prepared for anything. The conversation shifted to immediate security concerns. Catherine had also received threatening messages, including one slipped under her apartment door, a violation of her personal space that left her visibly shaken even over the phone. Jack insisted she stay with friends for a few days at least, until the story broke and public attention provided some measure of protection. After they hung up, Jack sat on his back porch, watching the lengthening shadows in his small yard as evening approached. The space where Sophie's swing set once stood now contained a fire pit and comfortable seatings, a change made last year when she declared herself too old for swings. The transformation of that space mirrored Sophie's growth, reminding Jack how quickly time passed, how precious these years were. He wouldn't allow Marcus Webb or anyone else to taint them with fear. Sophie would be home from her after-school program, soon picked up by Jack's neighbor, Mrs. Gonzalez, as part of their new security protocol. Jack had explained the arrangement to Sophie as a temporary measure due to his irregular work schedule, not wanting to burden her with the full weight of adult concerns. She'd accepted the explanation with minimal questions, though Jack suspected she understood more than she let on. His phone rang again, an unknown number. Jack answered cautiously. Mr. Foster, this is Howard Mercer. The developer's voice was tense, lacking its usual confident bluster. We need to talk about your position. Jack's grip tightened on the phone. I thought we already discussed this. I'm taking a few days off until the media attention dies down. That's no longer sufficient. Howard sighed heavily. I've received calls from several investors who've been approached by the Webb family. They're threatening to block permits on 3 of our upcoming projects unless we terminate your employment. Permanently. The demand wasn't unexpected, but hearing it confirmed still ignited a cold fury in Jack's chest. So you're firing me? I don't want to, Howard insisted, a note of genuine regret in his voice. You're the best foreman I've worked with in 20 years, but these projects represent millions in investment, dozens of jobs. I can't risk. Save it, Jack interrupted, his voice level despite his anger. I understand the calculation. You're cutting losses. Howard's relief was palpable. I'll provide an excellent reference, of course, and a severance package, 3 months' salary, full benefits through the end of the year. Generous, Jack acknowledged, the word carrying more bitterness than he intended. But unnecessary. I quit. Jack, don't be hasty. It's not hasty, it's principled. Jack stood pacing the length of his porch. If I let you fire me, the Webbs win. They prove their threats work. I won't give them that satisfaction, and I won't put you in that position. So I'm resigning effective immediately. The silence on the line stretched for several seconds before Howard spoke again. I respect your decision, even if I think it's a mistake. The severance offer stands regardless of how we frame the separation. Jack accepted this compromise, recognizing that pride wouldn't pay his mortgage or Sophie's eventual college expenses. They concluded the call with awkward formalities, Howard promising to have HR prepare the necessary paperwork, Jack agreeing to return company property the following day. After hanging up, Jack stood motionless on his porch, absorbing the impact of this latest blow. The construction site had been more than employment. It had been his anchor in civilian life, a place where his skills translated, where he could build rather than destroy. Now that anchor was gone, severed by the same forces that were threatening his daughter's safety and Catherine's career. The familiar weight of his phone in his pocket reminded Jack that he'd need to tell Catherine about this development. But before he could call her, the device buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. How does unemployment feel, hero? This is just the beginning. By the time we're done, you won't be able to get hired as a day laborer in this town. Your daughter will watch her big, strong daddy crumble into nothing. The naked malice in the message, the explicit mention of Sophie, crystallized Jack's resolve. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was psychological warfare, a deliberate attempt to break him through fear and financial pressure. The tactics were different from those he'd faced in combat, but the underlying principles were the same. Identify vulnerabilities, apply, pressure, exploit, reaction. Jack deleted the message after taking a screenshot for evidence. Then he called Catherine, updating her on the job situation and the latest threat. Her response was immediate and practical. This actually works in our favor, she pointed out. It strengthens the narrative for Alex's article, a decorated veteran losing his job for helping a woman being harassed. It makes their retaliation explicit. Jack appreciated her strategic thinking, though it did little to address his immediate financial concerns. I've got savings enough for a few months, but long-term. One battle at a time, Catherine counseled. Let's focus on getting the web story published, filing the restraining order, and ensuring Sophie's safety. Employment opportunities will come once this situation stabilizes. After ending the call, Jack heard Mrs. Gonzalez's car pulling into his driveway. Sophie was home. He tucked away his concerns behind a calm expression, greeting his daughter with a hug as she bounded up the porch steps, her backpack swinging wildly. Dad, Mrs. G brought cookies, and her grandson Miguel is visiting from college, and he knows all about construction engineering. Sophie's excitement temporarily banished the shadows of the day's events. Can we have cookies before dinner, please? Jack agreed, ushering her inside while thanking Mrs. Gonzalez, a retired teacher who had known Sophie since infancy. As Sophie arranged cookies on a plate, chattering about her day, Jack moved through the house with heightened awareness, checking locks, scanning sightlines through windows, mentally mapping defensive positions, habits from his military days that had resurfaced in response to the perceived threat. The evening passed with homework, dinner, and Sophie's favorite board game. Jack maintained an outward normalcy, answering her questions about the new locks, with a simplified explanation about home security updates, steering conversations toward school projects and weekend plans rather than his employment situation or the Webb family's threats. After Sophie was asleep, Jack sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, reviewing his financial position more thoroughly. The severance package would provide temporary stability, but the job market for construction foremen was relationship-driven. The Webb's influence could effectively blacklist him throughout Austin's development community. He might need to consider relocating, disrupting Sophie's life, just as she was establishing stronger peer connections. A text from Catherine interrupted his calculations. Meeting with judge tomorrow at 9 a.m. for temporary restraining order. Alex's preliminary article scheduled for Sunday online edition, Monday print. You holding up okay? Jack replied with more confidence than he felt. Managing, focus on the legal front. I'll handle security. Sleep came fitfully that night, Jack's mind cycling through contingencies, threat assessments, and financial projections. He rose before dawn, checking the perimeter of his property before starting coffee, the ritual bringing a semblance of normalcy to an increasingly abnormal situation. The security system installers arrived at 8, efficiently placing sensors on windows and doors, setting up motion detectors in key areas connecting everything to a monitoring service. Jack watched their work with a professional eye, suggesting adjustments based on his tactical knowledge. By noon, the system was operational, another layer of protection, however imperfect. Catherine called mid-afternoon, her voice carrying an unfamiliar excitement. Judge granted the temporary restraining order against Marcus Webb. He's legally prohibited from coming within 100 yards of you, Sophie, your home, or her school. Jack received the news with measured optimism. Good work, though I doubt a piece of paper will stop him if he's determined. It's not about stopping him, Catherine explained. It's about establishing consequences. If he violates the order, we have legal grounds for arrest regardless of his family connections. The strategy made sense, creating a framework where Marcus's behavior could trigger automatic legal mechanisms, bypassing the influence that might otherwise shield him. Any reaction from the Webb camp yet? Their attorney called to discuss amicable resolution options. Catherine's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. I referred them to the firm's managing partner, who surprisingly backed my position. Turns out several partners were uncomfortable with the Webbs' strong-arm tactics once they were made explicit. The shift in momentum was encouraging, though Jack remained cautious. And the article, moving forward as planned, Alex has corroborated enough of our information to run the first piece focusing on the pattern of harassment and intimidation. The financial angles will follow in subsequent articles. Jack acknowledged the update, then shared his own news, the security system installation, the arrangements with former teammates to maintain informal surveillance, the continued precautions at Sophie's school. They were creating a defensive perimeter, layering protections against whatever retaliation might come next. The weekend passed without incident, a suspicious quiet that left Jack more alert rather than less. Sophie noticed his heightened vigilance, asking pointed questions about the extra locks, the security system, why they weren't going to their usual park or restaurant. Jack provided simplified explanations, balancing honesty against age-appropriate filtering. Remember those men from the restaurant? He asked her Saturday evening as they made pizza together in the kitchen. The ones who were bothering that lady. Sophie nodded, carefully arranging pepperoni in a pattern only she understood. The ones you stopped. The ones in the video everyone saw. Right. Well, one of them wasn't happy about what happened. He's been causing some problems for me and for Ms. Catherine, the lady from the restaurant. Sophie's hand stilled her expression, growing serious. What kind of problems? Jack measured his words carefully. He damaged some equipment at my work site, sent some not nice messages. Nothing too serious, but enough that we need to be extra careful for a while. Sophie processed this, her forehead creasing in the way it did when she was thinking deeply. Is that why Mrs. G is picking me up from school? And why you're checking the doors all the time? Yes, Jack admitted, impressed by her perception. Just temporary precautions until the situation resolves. Is he going to hurt us? The directness of her question, the underlying fear it revealed, twisted something in Jack's chest. No, sweetheart. He's just trying to scare us to make us feel bad about what happened. Jack knelt to her eye level, ensuring she could see the certainty in his face. I won't let anyone hurt you, ever. That's a promise, Yamatu. Sophie studied him with that penetrating gaze that sometimes made Jack wonder who was reassuring whom. I know, Dad. You always keep your promises. She returned to her pepperoni placement, then added casually, and I'm not scared, because you taught me that doing the right thing matters more than being scared. The simple affirmation of his values reflected back through his daughter's understanding struck Jack more powerfully than any praise from commanders or peers ever had. He had taught her this not through lectures, but through actions, most recently at the restaurant, standing up when others looked away. Sunday morning brought the publication of Alex Reyes' first article on the Austin Chronicle's website, Pattern of Harassment: How One Family's Power Shields Bad Behavior. The piece was measured but damning, documenting Marcus Webb's history of harassment, complaints, the recent events at the Riverview Grill, and the subsequent retaliation against Jack and Catherine. It included statements from restaurant staff confirming Catherine's version of events, quotes from construction workers about the site vandalism, and pointed questions about the Webb family's use of influence to punish perceived enemies. Jack read the article twice, noting the careful journalistic balance, presenting evidence while avoiding definitive accusations that couldn't be proven, hinting at larger patterns while focusing on documented incidents. It was skillfully crafted to be legally defensible while morally damning. Catherine called shortly after the article went live online. "It's getting traction already. 3,000 shares in the first hour, comments flooding in. Local TV stations are picking it up for evening broadcasts." Jack had been monitoring social media reactions, watching as the narrative shifted from his actions at the restaurant to the Webb family's pattern of behavior. "How are you holding up? Any fallout at the firm yet?" "Managing partner called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning," Catherine reported. "But I'm hearing whispers that several partners are uncomfortable with how this looks for the firm, appearing to enable harassment by prioritizing the Webb's business. The momentum might be turning in our favor." The cautious optimism in her voice mirrored Jack's own assessment. Public exposure was changing the calculus, making it potentially more costly for institutions to side with the Webbs than to support those the family had targeted. The strategy was working, at least initially. "Any response from the Webb camp directly?" Jack asked, shifting his phone to his other ear as he checked the security system's status panel. "Nothing official, but I've heard through firm grapevine that Marcus's father is furious. Apparently he's been in emergency meetings with PR consultants since early this morning." Catherine paused. "This could get worse before it gets better, Jack. When people like the Webbs feel cornered, they sometimes lash out more severely." Jack acknowledged the warning, his military training having taught him that transition points, moments when momentum shifted, were often the most dangerous phases of any conflict. "Stay alert. Follow your security protocols. I'll do the same here." The rest of Sunday passed quietly. Jack and Sophie spending the afternoon baking cookies and playing board games, normal activities behind locked doors and active security systems. Jack received periodic updates from his former teammates, maintaining informal surveillance, confirming saw no unusual activity near his home. Catherine checked in hourly, reporting increasing online engagement with the article, but no direct response from the Webbs. Monday morning brought Sophie's return to school after the weekend. Jack drove her himself, bypassing the usual carpool arrangement for the added security of personally escorting her to the entrance, where the school resource officer now maintained a visible presence. The temporary restraining order against Marcus Webb had been provided to school administrators, with Sophie's teachers briefed on security protocols. "Dad," Sophie asked as they approached the school, "is today going to be weird? Are kids going to talk about the article?" Jack glanced at her, surprised by her awareness. "You know about the article?" Sophie rolled her eyes with the exasperated fondness children reserve for clueless parents. "Dad, I know how to use the internet. Allie's mom showed her the article, and Allie texted me yesterday." Jack suppressed a smile at her matter-of-fact tone. Of course, children discussed adult matters among themselves, translating complex situations through their own understanding. "It might be a topic of conversation," he acknowledged. "If anyone says anything that makes you uncomfortable, tell your teacher. Or text me and I'll pick you up early." Sophie nodded, then asked with unexpected directness, "Are you going back to work today?" The question caught Jack off guard. He hadn't yet explained his employment situation to Sophie, hoping to shield her from that particular adult concern until the immediate security issues were resolved. "Not today. I'm taking some time off to handle this situation with the Webbs." Sophie studied him with that disconcerting perceptiveness. "You got fired because of what happened at the restaurant, didn't you? Because you helped Ms. Catherine." Jack considered deflecting, then decided against it. Sophie deserved honesty, presented appropriately. Not fired exactly, I resigned, but guess it's connected to what happened at the restaurant. The Webbs put pressure on my boss. Sophie absorbed this information, her expression somber. That's not fair. No, it's not, Jack agreed. But sometimes doing the right thing has consequences. That doesn't make it any less right. Sophie nodded slowly. Like when Jamie got in trouble for telling the teacher that Tyler was cheating on the math test. The other kids called her a snitch, but she still did the right thing. Jack smiled at her ability to find relevant parallels in her own experience. Very similar, yes. And just like Jamie was right to tell the truth, I was right to help Ms. Catherine, even though some people are angry about it. They had reached the school entrance. Sophie adjusted her backpack straps, then looked up at Jack with unexpected solemnity. I'm proud of you, Dad, even if you don't have your job anymore. The simple statement, delivered with a child's directness, pierced Jack more deeply than any praise from commanders or comrades ever had. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. After seeing Sophie safely inside, Jack drove to Catherine's law firm, where they had arranged to meet before her partner's emergency session. He found her in the same conference room as before, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that projected confidence and professionalism, though the slight tension around her eyes betrayed her underlying stress. The article's impact is even bigger than we anticipated. She reported, sliding a tablet across the table with social media metrics displayed. Over 50,000 shares trending locally, picked up by regional news outlets. And this morning, 3 more women have come forward with accounts of harassment by Marcus Webb. Jack scanned the data, noting the acceleration of engagement, the shifting tone of comments from surprise to outrage. The Webbs must be feeling the heat. Any direct response yet? Their PR firm issued a statement last night, standard damage control, language about taking all allegations seriously, and committed to respectful workplace environments. Catherine's expression conveyed her skepticism. But the real battle will be in this morning's partners meeting. The firm has to decide whether to stand with me or with the Webbs. Jack heard the underlying anxiety in her voice. Despite the public momentum, Catherine's professional future remained uncertain. What's your read on which way they'll go? Catherine arranged her notepads with precise movements, a gesture Jack had come to recognize as her method of channeling nervous energy. Honestly, it could go either way. The managing partner seems to be leaning towards supporting me. He values the firm's reputation and recognizes how bad it would look to punish a female attorney for refusing unwanted advances. But several senior partners have long-standing personal relationships with the Webb family. The uncertainty of her position highlighted the different stakes they each faced in this confrontation. Jack had already lost his job, but construction skills were transferable opportunities available in other cities if necessary. Catherine's career as a corporate attorney, however, depended heavily on professional reputation and firm backing. The Webbs could damage her trajectory more permanently. Whatever happens in that meeting, Jack said, remember, we have leverage now. Public opinion, media attention, other options if this firm makes the wrong choice. Catherine's smile held grim determination. Trust me, I've prepared my exit strategy if necessary. 6 years building my career here, but I won't stay where I'm not valued. She glanced at her watch. The meeting starts in 15 minutes. I should prepare. As Jack stood to leave, Catherine reached across the table, briefly squeezing his hand. Thank you, Jack, for everything. Most men would have walked away from this fight long ago. Jack shook his head. I've never been good at walking away from fights that matter. The simple acknowledgement hung between them, carrying more meaning than either was prepared to explore amid the current crisis. Catherine withdrew her hand, gathering her materials for the meeting. Jack wished her luck, then headed toward the elevator, his next stop the police station to follow up on the restraining order and harassment complaints. In the lobby, as Jack waited for the elevator, his phone rang. Sophie's school. His heart rate spiked as he answered, immediately alert. Hello, the school's secretary's voice was professionally calm but urgent. Mr. Foster, we have a situation involving Sophie. She's safe, she added quickly, but there's been an incident. A man claiming to be her uncle attempted to pick her up during morning recess. Our staff recognized him as unauthorized and contacted security immediately. Jack's military training kicked in, emotions channeled into focused action. I'm on my way. Has the man been detained? Security confronted him, but he left campus before police arrived. We have him on security cameras and have notified the police. Sophie is in the principal's office now. She didn't interact with the man directly. Tell her I'll be there in 15 minutes, Jack said, already moving toward the parking garage. And thank you for your vigilance. The drive to Oak Ridge Elementary compressed into a blur of traffic lights and turn signals, Jack's mind cycling through possibilities. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Immediately following the article's publication, a direct escalation targeting Sophie despite the restraining order. The Webbs were responding not with public statements, but with personal intimidation. At the school, Jack found Sophie sitting in the principal's office, a counselor by her side. She appeared calm but subdued, brightening visibly when she spotted him. Dad. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. They said a stranger tried to pick me up, but I didn't see him. Was it that man from the restaurant? Jack held her close, relief washing through him. We're not sure yet, sweetheart, but you're safe, that's what matters. He looked to the principal, who stood nearby. Have the police identified the man from your security footage? Principal Reeves nodded grimly. The officer who responded recognized him immediately. It was Marcus Webb himself, despite the restraining order. They're looking for him now. The direct violation of the legal order shifted the situation dramatically. Marcus had crossed from harassment into potential criminal behavior, giving law enforcement clearer grounds for intervention, regardless of his family's influence. But the escalation also signaled dangerous desperation, a man willing to risk arrest to make his point. I'd like to take Sophie home for the day, Jack told the principal, until Webb is in custody. Principal Reeves agreed immediately, helping expedite the sign-out process while the school counselor gathered Sophie's belongings from her classroom. Within 20 minutes, they were driving home, Sophie unusually quiet in the passenger seat. Dad, she finally asked as they approached their neighborhood, are we in danger, like real danger? Jack weighed honesty against reassurance, choosing his words carefully. The man who tried to pick you up today is angry and making bad choices, but he's not dangerous in the way you might be thinking. He's trying to scare us, not hurt us. Sophie absorbed this, her forehead creased in thought. Because of what happened at the restaurant, because you stopped him from bothering Miss Catherine. Partly that, Jack acknowledged, but also because Miss Catherine and I are challenging his family's power. They're used to getting their way, to people backing down when threatened. We're not backing down, and that makes them uncomfortable. Sophie nodded slowly, processing the explanation.